Hello, noble home dogs. Let's talk about the departure of Gina Carano from The Mandalorian. So, from the get-go, I acknowledge that I don't really have a dog in this race. I am a cisgender, white, heterosexual male. I know nothing firsthand of any kind of oppression, so if I get anything wrong in this video, bear with me, please do let me know. I'm also aware that I have made contradictory posts to this video on Twitter. As of right now, as of this video's upload, this is the definitive version of my opinion on this subject. Now, full disclosure, I am a liberal. I believe that life is good, but it could be better, and it should be better. Mainly for young people trying to make a living, and affording the resources to make said living, wanting to get a foot on the property ladder. For my friends of African origin, and other immigrants, non-native speakers to my country. Peaceful, good, moral people of different religions, and different faiths, and different walks of life. And of course, the LGBTQ+ community. I think the world can be pretty unkind to these people. And personally, I don't take too kindly to people with big platforms perpetuating falsehoods or undermining the plight of these people. I acknowledge that I have a flaw. I have a tendency to be very intolerant towards conservatives and people with conservative values. Particularly on my Twitter, I have made some very inflammatory comments towards conservatives and any kind of conservative value. And I have a tendency to kind of ostracize and vilify that. I do want to correct here by trying to recognize that this debate, this situation, isn't quite as binary as I and many others who are like me have kind of painted it out to be. So, back in September of 2020, Gina Carano shared her thoughts on the COVID situation at the time, holding the belief that businesses and churches should be allowed to open and regulate under whatever rules that the business owners see fit, because that is an American right. So when she states, any regulations that they want, that could include that maybe they don't mandate masks upon entry. Now, I recognize that this is just me reading into this, but I think to an extent, the businesses should be able to open if they see fit. But there's also an obligation to protect their staff, their customers, and themselves from this virus. So I do personally hold the opinion that masks should be mandatory in any indoor public space. And I do think that, at the risk of sounding like a very heavy-handed person here, you'd have to be a bit irresponsible to disagree with that, because masks are important. This is a time where we've got a virus out there that can kill people. And I've heard all the arguments that, it only kills people with underlying health conditions. The flu's killed more people. But guys, use your brains here. You can't afford to have a second flu that can kill just as many people. Take the amount of people that the flu kills and then double that. You want to work with that? Add COVID-19 death toll to the flu death toll. If you want your kids to grow up in that world, I'm not going to say be my guest because I actually care about my loved ones. And as well as that, are we just to act as though people with underlying health conditions aren't important now? That it's okay that they die because we're all alive? I would argue that that's a pretty psychotic perspective. So the problem here is that Gina's tweet perpetuates this sort of narrative that COVID-19 restrictions are a choice, and it's an American right to have that choice. But the three American fundamentals are that everyone has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You don't have any of those three things if you're dead, because some idiot thought it was their choice to not wear a mask. It doesn't take a second to reach this conclusion. You got a brain, use it. So would I say that this tweet here makes Gina Carano a bad person? Not really. It's a well-intentioned tweet, even if it does validate a very toxic and dangerous ideal. There's a distinct lack of nuance here, but I don't think it intrinsically paints her as an anti-masker. Sometimes you can just have a poorly researched point, and sometimes it can be on a very sensitive global topic, so I wouldn't outright ostracize her for that alone. I do think that mentioning protests in there is a bit of a false equivalency, because she's saying, you know, like, COVID doesn't really know any difference between a protest and a place of worship. The protests at that time were very urgent. They were very much a human rights matter that just couldn't wait. In fact, was already long overdue. Whereas worship, you can do it at home. So yeah, a stupid, unnuanced point could easily be given a good rebuttal. I think throwing around the anti-masker label was maybe a bit of a jump to conclusions. I personally wouldn't vilify her over this, I would be more inclined to correct her. So then there's the matter of transphobia, the pronouns issue. A lot of people in the LGBTQ community, and even outside of that, like to put their pronouns in their bios, to normalize that sometimes the pronouns won't be necessarily obvious. And I think this is more than fair. There's a lot of like transphobic individuals that are like, how can I be expected to keep up with everyone's pronouns? People are putting it in their bios, so like people don't really have a leg to stand on when saying that's wrong. But anyway, Pedro Pascal had his pronouns in his bios, and a lot of people were trying to urge Gina Carano to do the same, to kind of help push that forward, to kind of normalize it a little bit, which is fine and fair enough, but there were people taking it too far, taking it to levels of harassment and bullying. And out of sheer frustration, Gina Carano put beep boop bop as her pronouns, believing it to be inoffensive and just a fun little nod to the pronouns and a fun little nod to the Mandalorian. But obviously this isn't the case, because it actually undermines a big part of the cause for the LGBTQ community, and pokes a lot of fun at those that do include pronouns in their bios. So a lot of people are naturally upset about this and very angry. Some people dealt with it very calmly and rationally. Some people got very aggressive about it. She made things worse by arguing back, saying that she's not transphobic and it shouldn't be offensive, but you should never tell a specific and often oppressed group that what you did isn't offensive. You should try and hear out why it is offensive. Speaking as a cisgender male, we don't understand why certain things hurt people in the trans community the way they do, because we haven't experienced it for ourselves. We got nothing to base it off of. What we do know is that Pedro Pascal did in fact educate her on why it was inappropriate. He helped her understand, and in educating her, what he did was more effective than people rallying against her. A YouTube content creator that I'm a huge fan of, Council of Geeks, put it really well. Sometimes it's not right to call a person transphobic. You can call their actions transphobic. Like, Gina Carano might have been at the time right that she's not transphobic, but what she said was transphobic, and that's what she needs to acknowledge. But when people are calling you as a person transphobic, you can only argue back against the argument that's being leveled against you. Let's kind of fast forward to her comparison between the treatment of conservatives in America and Jews in the Holocaust. Her overall point was that at the time of the Holocaust, at the beginning of it, the government was kind of indoctrinating and brainwashing the public into hating the Jews. And she kind of felt like that was beginning with Republicans and conservatives in the USA. It's a very inappropriate comparison to make. It's a point you can make without the comparison to the Holocaust, because it undermines the victims of the Holocaust and the families of the Holocaust to kind of imply, oh, I've been receiving some heat from my neighbors or from Twitter, to people legitimately dying. Now, I do think what she said here was partially a byproduct of some of the bullying and harassment that she had received around the time of the comments that she had made. But allow me to just make another point quickly. I understand why people jump to conclusions these days. I understand why people get very angry these days. Everyone's had enough. You know, it's 2021 and people are still facing transphobia, bigotry, racism. These things are still a massive problem, so tolerance towards the belittlement of these issues is growing ever lower. I understand. But I believe that the more we let a person's behaviors reflect on the person altogether and act as a judgment on the person together, the more we call people transphobic, racist, bigoted, anti-Semitic, and not their actions, the more it breeds this sense of these people feeling like victims and posting stupid shit like this. We need to educate these people, and sometimes I understand it's frustrating we can't make our voices heard. Sometimes they're just not hearing us, sometimes they're fighting back, And then, yes, it does become a different matter at that stage. I'd like to, open up and admit to something right now, which probably doesn't paint me in the best light. And this was only approximately 5 years ago, but I had far more regressive opinions towards people in the trans community, namely things like gender fluid, things that aren't just, transition from male to female, female to male as such, more everything goes on in between. And I voiced those opinions on social media. Thank God I wasn't Channel Pup at that time. And I had a vast range of different responses to this. I had some people that were very angry with me, some people that seeked to educate me, and people that were incredibly patient with me. And I have to say, it was those that were patient and educating that really changed me, although I do understand why people were angry looking back. I'm angry at myself, to be honest. But it's like they say, change begins at home, and you can be on the right side of history, but nuance is still very effective. And to those trans folks that I know that don't know it yet, I'm very sorry for ever holding those opinions and expressing them on social media like that. I can only imagine how that must have made you feel. But then we end up on the matter of cancel culture. I remember I saw the hashtag Fire Gina Carano trending. Now, I can't speak for any person's perspective here, because as I've said, I don't really have a dog in this race, and I don't want to risk talking down to anybody. But film production is a massive process, and you can bet that you're not gonna like necessarily everybody involved on a project, and that there will be at least one person in there that holds views that are distant from our own, views that may be repulsive and dangerous and regressive, views where that person simply should know better. And the real reason people wanted Gina Carano fired from The Mandalorian is so that they could watch the show with the peace of mind that this person that stands against their very being, the very validity of their being, is not a part of that show. I understand that, like Amber Heard in Aquaman 1. I can't watch that movie because she's in it so much and I just get distracted by it. Opting to disengage with the projects and products that a person you dislike is a part of is not cancel culture. That's your choice. You vote with your wallet. And completely fair enough. And that's different to the Fire Gina Carano hashtag. But I understand where that comes from. I understand where that comes from completely. This person has really hurt you, and you don't think they deserve the position and the platform that they have. I understand that entirely. But the thing is, all the while that's going on, she's not being educated on the matter. The idea that she'd get fired from the show, reflect on her behavior, and realize, oh dang, I did this to myself, is an idealistic one. And that's not something that's logically going to happen. She's just going to see all these people rallying against her, feel ostracized, feel like a victim, and that is how we end up with more extreme versions of shit like this. And then just like since all that, look at some of the shit that she's clicked like on. Ew. We've got to be able to consider maybe playing some role in that ourselves if we're really against this problem. We might not be, but it's food for thought, right? It's worth thinking about. This is how we, as good, progressive people, accidentally breed a more extreme, regressive behavior in these people. And lo and behold, Gina Carano did lose her job at Disney, not through cancel culture, not through the hashtag, but through actually a very logical thing. She was not upholding the values that Disney as a corporation want to uphold. She was not serving that face that Disney is very, very sensitive of. They want to be the inclusive, ever-encompassing brand, even though sometimes they really prove to not be. They want to be seen as every viewer's bestest bud. And Gina Carano was warned 3 times not to post stuff like that, to be careful on her social media, to uphold those Disney values. And she was between contracts. So naturally, they didn't renew her contract. That's not cancel culture, and the only person she has to blame for any of that is herself. But because people very intensely, very aggressively rallied against her up until that point, because there was a lot of bile, a lot of name calling, because she felt like that victim, she's now going on to work with Ben Shapiro. This has birthed a new perspective for her on people like us. Decent people that just want the same rights for everyone. It has transformed the regressive ideal into just a different opinion, man. People shouldn't tweet whatever comes to their head, because sometimes your tweet needs work, sometimes it needs nuance. And acknowledging that is not a violation of anyone's freedom of speech, because freedom of speech is not freedom of any kind of social consequence. And Disney are allowed to hire and rehire people as they see fit. But in the grand scheme of things, the big vilification and ostracization of Gina Carano, we no longer have that opportunity to educate her properly now. I understand people are angry. I understand that trans rights and the end of anti-Semitism and racism and all of that are well overdue now. I understand that entirely, and I believe in that. I wholeheartedly support these causes, and Gina Carano lacked the nuance to speak to these causes effectively. But I think the best thing we can do going forward is to drop the mob mentality, which I understand why it's there, but I think the best thing we can do is drop that and use nuanced arguments in their place. Because otherwise, unfortunately, we are only contributing to a loud, noisy, and aggressive rhetoric, which is breeding more and more extremism on both sides. And that's not what we need. Politics these days has become a war of ideologies, with all kinds of decent people being caught up in the crossfire. But remember, social media warfare, workplace warfare, taking people's jobs away and such, words win wars much better. Education will win this. And I know why it's hard to believe that people can change, but Pedro Pascal tried it, and it was effective to some degree. So if you are angry about what Gina Carano has said and done, I support you, and I agree. And I think you are very much on the right side of history, but we've got to think our methods through here. Educating people can be a slow and arduous process, but I don't know, maybe I'm just idealistic in believing that maybe people can change. Maybe their actions are worse than the people making them. But that's where I invite you a discussion. Comment below and discuss, and as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, hit subscribe, hit the like button, and in the description below are links to different social media feeds, as well as my Patreon and a join button for if you're feeling extra supportive and extra generous, but of course, you don't have to worry about that if you don't want to. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and have a great day.